Welcome to this explainer. If you want to understand the current state of Alzheimer's disease research, it helps to think of it not just as science, but as a heavily diversified financial portfolio. To find a successful treatment, researchers really have to act like investors. They're spreading their bets across different biological targets to manage risk and maximize the chances of a real breakthrough. Today, we're taking a measured, factual look at the current state of that portfolio.
Looking at the sheer scale of this market, there are currently 158 unique drugs being tested across 192 active clinical trials. Just as a quick refresher, a clinical trial phase is the step-by-step process used to prove if a drug is safe and if it actually works. And right now, this pipeline is highly active across all of those stages of development.
Within this portfolio, a massive 73% of these scientific bets are what we call disease-modifying therapies. This means they aim to change the underlying disease process itself rather than just treating the symptoms. You can think of it as a long-term investment strategy, one that's aimed at actually slowing the physical decline caused by the disease.
Historically, a lot of capital was tied up in one specific asset, and that's amyloid. Amyloid is a protein that abnormally builds up into plaques in the brains of people with Alzheimer's disease. If we look back to 2016, a pretty risky one-third of the entire pipeline was heavily invested in targeting this single protein.
But smart investors diversify. Over the last 10 years, researchers have carefully rebalanced the portfolio across 17 different biological processes. They actually shifted amyloid down to 20% of the pipeline. At the same time, investments targeting brain inflammation grew from just 6% up to 20%, right alongside other rising targets like the tau protein.
Another way researchers manage risk is through repurposed drugs. A repurposed drug is simply a medicine that was originally developed and approved for another condition, but is now being tested for a new use. These act as lower-risk investments because their basic safety is already understood, which helps balance out the higher-risk bets placed on entirely new compounds. Right now, repurposed drugs make up a solid 35% of the current pipeline.
So, you might be wondering, who exactly are the major investors funding these trials? Well, it splits mainly into two groups. The biopharmaceutical industry sponsors 59% of all trials overall, but they back a heavy 72% of the massive late-stage Phase 3 trials. Basically, they provide the heavy capital needed to finish the job. Meanwhile, universities and non-industry sponsors fund the bulk of the exploratory Phase 2 trials, doing the groundwork to search for new opportunities.
Despite all this investment, the market definitely has clear limits. For instance, there have been no new drug approvals since 2023. We're also seeing gaps where we're missing treatments for the symptom-free stages, the moderate to severe stages, and for behavioral symptoms. Furthermore, the system urgently needs over 54,000 volunteers for these active trials. Finding them relies heavily on a biomarker, which is a measurable biological sign used to correctly identify the exact right volunteers for these specific tests.
Still, the fundamentals of this sector remain incredibly strong. Over the last decade, this pipeline has grown by 35% in the total number of trials and 40% in the number of unique drugs. The portfolio has grown and diversified significantly. With millions of patients waiting, the ultimate question is no longer if we are placing the right scientific bets, but which one of these calculated investments will finally pay off.